Welcome to this episode of the Parresia Podcast. This is American Freedom Alliance's podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Karen Siegemund, president of the American Freedom Alliance, and I'm delighted to be joined by Trevor Loudon, who I've known for years and years. He's a fellow of the American Freedom Alliance, incredibly prolific author, speaker. He's all over the country, back and forth, exposing communists and communism wherever it appears, the enemies within and without, a number of books. Trevor, welcome. So glad to have you with us.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Thanks. Thanks. It's good to catch up with you, Karen, and greetings to the audience.
Yeah, really just great to have you. Trevor was our World War III roadshow that we did last year. You were a part of every single one, including our original one in Los Angeles, which the idea of talking about World War III, the whole title was World War III, the early years, without addressing communism, again, the enemies within, without. We delighted you were able to be with us every single time, Trevor. So let's talk about communism, because one of the things that I've been discovering as we do these events, as I talk to people here in Los Angeles, you know and I know the evils of communism, but I talk to a lot of my friends here in California. Obviously, it's going to be in California where the problems are the most profound. But when they talk to their kids have no idea of what communism is, of why it's a problem. And it sort of sloughs off their back, and they think we're all kind of hysterical about it. What is it about communism, Trevor, that kids need to be taught about today? What are the dangers and what are they missing?
Communism is the overturning of all the natural hierarchies of life. You know, we live in a society where we have families, we have businesses, we have religious institutions, economic institutions, we have all sorts of things, and there's a natural order of life. You know, it's God, man, nature. That's the natural order of things, and there are various hierarchies within that system. Communism is about overturning all of those hierarchies, those natural hierarchies, putting pupil against teacher, putting husband against wife, putting certain racial communities against other racial communities, putting workers against business owners, putting the environment as more important than human life. Putting animal life as more important than human life. See, people think of communism as this economic system devised by Karl Marx, but he applied these were ideas that started out with Cain and Abel. You know, you had Abel, who was the good son, who was the loyal, faithful, honest, dependable, faithful son. And there was Cain, who was lazy and slothful and resentful and bitter and angry that he didn't get his, rewarded by God the same as Abel did. And he overthrew him. He destroyed him. He killed him. Well, the American Revolution was an Abel revolution. It was a revolution of faithful, loyal people whose allegiance was to God and to human liberty. And they fought a revolution to secure those Abel values. The French Revolution was a Cain revolution. It was a jealous, resentful, tearing everything down revolution. Communism is not an economic system. It is the systematized destruction of all natural hierarchies and institutions with the goal of establishing a global dictatorship, a demonic dictatorship on earth. So everything you hold dear, family life, small business, a natural environment, good schools, good churches, good institutions, all of that is to be torn down. All of it is to be replaced by something top-down, centralized. And these kids just think it's a Che Guevara T-shirt, and we're all going to get more wealth and freedom whether we work for it or not. They think it's everything we have now plus some free stuff. but it's not. It's destruction of everything that is good about our society. It is empowering the resentful, empowering the bitter, empowering the twisted, the criminals, to tear down what we have so a dictatorship can arise in its place. That's communism. It's not the equal sharing of wealth. It's a centralization of all wealth and all power in a very few hands, a very few evil hands at that.
And it seems also it's a replacement of God. I mean, you went
Yes.
straight to biblical values, Cain and Abel, and not only is this a Cainian, but it's also a rejection of the very idea of any kind of biblical values of God. You also used the word demonic, but they would reject that too. Isn't it? It's a replacement of God and all that's good and all that's aspirational and all that's, grander than us, with the ultimate secular entity, the state, that's supposed
Yeah.
to provide everything that that Judeo-Christian religions do, right? It's
It's making the state God on earth, and see, but it is demonic. Paul Kengel wrote a great book, Marx and Satan, whereas he talked about, Marx started out as a Christian, but he got angry with God. He got bitter, and he wanted to overthrow God. Seriously, this is his motivation. So how do you overthrow God? You overthrow all God's institutions on earth. Why did Satan leave heaven? Satan was an angel in heaven at God's side, but he had that Cain spirit, that bitterness, that jealousy. He would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. And that's the root of all this communism, all this socialism. It's all based on bitterness and resentment. It's all about coveting thy neighbor's goods. It's all about it's all about a war on personal responsibility, because all our freedom comes from personal responsibility. All our liberty comes from personal responsibility. So if you destroy the concept of personal responsibility, which communism absolutely does, you destroy all the liberty that springs from that. It's just demonic. A lot of these communists say they're atheists, but they're serving the demonic, whether they understand it or not.
Yeah, it's its own religion,
Yeah,
clearly,
it
right?
is a religion. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got its own its own traditions, its own tenets, its own um, routines, activities, trappings, if you will,
Yeah. It's
that lets
heaven. It's
alone.
heaven. It's goal of heaven, the
Yeah,
classless society. It is. Look, hardcore communists are just as religious and deep in their faith as any evangelical Christian. They have a faith. They believe in it, and despite all contradictory evidence, they still maintain that belief. And I'm not saying it's a well-founded faith, but you can't argue with them on the basis of rationality because it's a faith thing for them.
right. That's right. That's really interesting, and it is highly dogmatic, and it brooks no dissent, um, and people who leave it are apostates, just as much as they're apostates who leave any other religion, right?
Yeah.
And are
Yeah, it is a religion, and it's an evil religion, and it must be countered in that way. Understanding that all these fools who think, well, communism collapsed in the Soviet Union and it was just an economic system. And all I think it was command economy and big rockets being paraded through Red Square every May Day, and Brezhnev and Stalin. And if that's not what you're seeing, it's not communism. Well, communism is a transgender movement. Communism is the environmental movement. Communism is the radical feminist movement. Black Lives Matter. These are all communist movements because communism is broadened out from the class struggle. Now it's the gender struggle, the gay struggle, the transgender struggle, the environmental struggle, the Black Lives Matter struggle, all these are manifestations of communism. We've got more communism in America now than we've ever had before, and less awareness of it than we've ever had before.
It seems that the communists really learned from the fall of the Soviet Union how to be much more subversive, how to have creeping tentacles into everything. I mean, everything that you just cited, the transgender movement, Black Lives Matter, all of this, they've gotten much better at being pernicious. And therefore, as you say, if it's not recognizable as, heavy-handed 5-year plan stuff, people don't recognize it at all, and they don't realize that they're being seriously under the thumb of, or under the boot of, much bigger players than they think. That these Black Lives Matter riots and everything, the mostly peaceful protests in Chaz Chop, that it was just sort of a spontaneous reaction to, I guess it was George Floyd. Preposterous. Nothing is happenstance, right?
No, look. The Freedom Road Socialist Organization, a pro-Chinese group, organized all the George Floyd protests. Another pro-Chinese group, Liberation Road, which works directly with the Chinese consulate in San Francisco, organized the rest. And it wasn't just George Floyd. They tried to start the riots when a jogger was killed in Atlanta. That didn't quite work. They tried to start it again when Breonna Taylor was killed in Kentucky. That didn't work. George Floyd was their third attempt. But it was in Minneapolis where their headquarters were, and it was so public, and it was very easy to spin into something. But the riots were all ready to go. If it hadn't been George Floyd, it would have been Frank Smith in Arizona the week after, or Joe Jones in Seattle the week after that. They were going to have riots in 2020. They set up an organization called the National Alliance Against Political and Racial Repression in Chicago in 2019 to look for examples of police brutality against Black and brown Americans, to start the riots, to provide a spark to start the riots. So there's a communist movement that did massive damage to this country. Black Lives Matter, completely a communist movement. And how many Americans do you think understand it was a communist movement?
Right, like nobody. And it makes everybody feel so good to be on the side of, we're not racists, we're Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Right?
How do you prove you're not a racist? Well, first they tell us we're all racist, whether we are or not. And then how do you prove you're not a racist? Well, you got to support a communist revolution in your own country called Black Lives Matter to prove you're not a racist, and expiate the guilt of something that maybe your great-great-grandfather did or maybe didn't, but you're somehow guilty for it, because to a communist, we have collective guilt. If we're part of a certain class, we have the guilt that class bears. Christians believe that you're guilty for what you do, not for what your grandfather did or your great-grandfather did. And that's how they get there. You can never escape. You can never escape your whiteness. So they hang their whiteness around your hat, around your neck. They talk about your white privilege. So your whole life is about expiating that guilt. There's a good story about a little church in North Carolina, and the Southern Baptists are full of this communist stuff. And there's a little Baptist church and a new church, and they had about half black and half white. And they got a new woke pastor, a Marxist pastor, who started going on about their white privilege. And he noticed that two of the families in the church had the same surname, a black family and a white family. And there was quite a distinctive surname. So the only logical conclusion was that the white family must have once enslaved the black family, you see. So he demanded of the white family that they apologize for their sin of racial oppression. And the white family said, well, we never owned slaves. There's nothing to do with us. And we're Christians. Even if it was our grandfather that did this, we're not responsible for what he did. Take a hike. But the pastor kept insisting, and that church was destroyed. That church just fell apart because of the stupid Marxist agitator who couldn't preach the gospel, but couldn't leave the Marxism alone.
And we're seeing repeatedly churches that are supposed to be the bastion of, I don't know, Christianity, just, throwing that out there with biblical values, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's and unto God that which is God's. But our churches seem to be rendering everything unto Caesar, which is in fact
100%.
rendering it unto Marx.
Well, yeah, exactly. The very first Communist Front in America was set up in 1907, even before the Bolshevik Revolution. It was called the Methodist Committee for Social Action. And it was because they started with the churches, because what does the revolutionary want? They want money, they want influence, and they want respectability. Where do you go but the church? You get into the church, and the church is very welcoming. They give the benefit of the doubt to everybody. Some of them are a bit naive. And so you get the communists into the church. They were infiltrating the churches hardcore in the 1920s. The Communist Party was telling its people, if you were brought up Baptist, go back to the Baptist church. If you're Jewish, go to the synagogue. If you're Mormon, go to the temple. Not to learn from them, but to spread communist influence in these institutions, which could be then used to spread revolution. You could get the churches to spread revolution. They've always, look, in the Alabama in the 1930s, they had a big communist movement in Alabama, mainly black sharecroppers. They used to open every Communist Party meeting with prayer, because these were all Christian people. These were deeply Christian people. They were not going to go against God. They were going against the man who oppressed them. And they say, well, God approves of this. God, we're praying to Jesus. We love Jesus just like you do. But we got to have Jesus wants a revolution. He wants to, so it's the churches are full of communism, critical race theory, gender privilege, all this. It's all Marxism, but most of these pastors have no clue, especially these young pastors who are coming out of the Bible colleges now. Most of the Bible colleges in America are as secular and Marxist as are the secular universities.
Well, and we know that the communist fundamental tenet is by any means necessary. So,
Yeah.
right, I mean, no surprise there. But at the same time, it's kind of interesting because these churches will wear this mantle of, we can't get political, we can't talk politics from the pulpit at all. That's not okay. But we can propagate these Marxist ideas and ideals because this is somehow good for humanity, but we can't be patriotic in the classic sense.
No, you can't talk conservative politics from the pulpit. You can talk socialism all day long. So it's completely directed at traditional conservative Christianity, this so-called myth of separation of, church and state. The famous letter to the Danbury Baptists by Thomas Jefferson, who all he was saying, we don't want a state church in America. There was no thought that America should not be a Christian-focused country. Never. America was founded by Christians. It was great because of Christianity. Christianity has produced all the great civilizations of the last few hundred years.
Right, but they will reject it because you can't be political in the churches. You can't be political, and you cannot be patriotic. But you can have these grander ideas like Marxism. That's okay.
Yeah, you can be. You can go on all about global warming all you like, but never about subglobal warming. You can go on. You can accept what you can go all about white privilege and unconscious racism. That's all Marxism. That's all fine, but you can't talk about the Old Testament. You can't talk about hell. You can't talk about sin or repentance. You just go along, listen to these feel-good music, feel-good messages. This Marxism, put some money in the collection plate, and listen to the rock band, and spend a bit of money at the cafe, and you're saved. You're good.
And you can't talk about self-agency, and you can't, heaven forbid, pun intended, you talk about any of the 10 Commandments because those are all being overturned.
Yeah, all the Old Testament's pretty much overturned. Modern Christianity in most churches is just a feel-good self-help. You might as well go to an encounter group or a self-help group. A lot of them don't even have Christian crosses on their churches anymore. That's it's an entertainment center come self-help group. That's what it is. Left wing to boot.
Given this tremendous ignorance about communism and how it is pernicious and it's everywhere and it's harder to detect than it once had been, what should we be looking out for? When I talk to my friends and they, want to tell their kids or their grandchildren why this is evil, are there things that they can look out for, Trevor? What?
Well, yeah, well, anything that's anti-American, anything that is anti-freedom, anything that is calling you to sacrifice for the state, anything that is calling you to surrender your self-agency or, surrender the COVID mandates were a great example of socialism. All rationality went out the window, and we basically lived under a Chinese-style command economy right through COVID for 2.5 years. So, look, anything that attacks traditional Christianity or Judaism, anything that attacks man's dominion over the environment, anything that attacks family stability, standards and competition, anything that attacks, excellence and merit-based promotion. Affirmative action's a communist thing. Hate speech legislation, which attacks freedom of speech, is another that was given to us by the Maoists. And so you can look at what made America good. Christianity, Judaism, the Constitution, hard work, traditional values. Anything that attacks any of that, you'll find the communist movement will be behind that. Look, the Boy Scouts was once a patriotic, noble organization that trained young American men to prepare for citizenship and to serve in the military if necessary. The communists started bringing down the Boy Scouts in the 1920s. They started attacking it. Then they started infiltrating gay people into the Boy Scouts and initiating legal lawsuits and all this, and basically destroyed a noble institution. Look, the one of the guys who instituted the lawsuit that allowed gay men to become scout leaders is now the treasurer of the Phoenix Democratic Socialists of America. The guy who got into the Boy Scouts to do that.
Yeah.
To start that lawsuit, this discrimination lawsuit. So, yeah, look, communism is anything that breaks down the natural hierarchies, breaks down what is good about America. Anything that attacks the Constitution, you will find a communist origin to it. Communism is the biggest political movement in America today.
It seems it's also a war on truth. All these things that you cite, it's not just wars on the natural ordering of things, but it's when people require you to say things that you know to be not true. A man just won, some track meet thing. Men are women and women are men. Just from the get-go, anything to do with George Floyd was a lie. The hands up, don't shoot thing was a lie. So much, it seems, of Marxism, of communism, requires you to believe, or at least say that you believe, things that are patently false.
Well, look, to have a revolution, you got to break down individuals. And the best way to break down an individual is cognitive dissonance, where you have to say what is clearly false. If they can make you do that, you're halfway there. You are a broken individual. When you're a doctor and you have to give your patient a treatment that you know is going to hurt them, and not tell them about the treatment that will help them, you're destroying your soul. You are become part of that system, and you have to maintain that system to keep yourself safe. because you've compromised. There's a great scene in 1984 by George Orwell, who was a Marxist who saw the light and wrote about the dangers of Marxism. But it's about when Winston, the protagonist, is being tortured, and they're saying, 2 + 2 = 5. And he said, no, no, no. And they ramp up the torture. And they keep on one question, 2 + 2 = 5, 2 + 2 = 5. And eventually he breaks and says, all right, 2 + 2 = 5. And they keep torturing him. And he says, well, I said it. He said, no, you have to believe it. So every time you have to say you believe that there are 57 genders, when you have to buy into blatant lies, you're damaging your own psychology, and you're making yourself more easy to control because you have betrayed yourself. You betrayed your. So this is a very insidious psychological thing. And the communists talk, well, they'll also talk about something called revolutionary truth. A lot of these communists, a lot of these Adam Schiff, who was going on about Russia collusion for years, while he was basically working with some of the top Chinese communist operations in the country, he would lie about Trump all the time. Lie. But if you put him on a lie detector, he'd probably pass it. Because revolutionary truth is what serves the revolution. Truth is not what is objectively real. Truth is what serves the revolution. So he was telling the truth.
Right.
By his standards.
Right. It's just redefining what truth is.
Yeah.
I have said for, not decades, but a very long time, if the truth were relevant to the left, there would be no left.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. You cannot put any value into the truth as truth at all. It has to be what, as you say, in service of the revolution, and then anything goes. And if you believe that that's correct, anything in service of the revolution, you've just redefined what truth is, and you muddle along in a perfectly happy way.
Yeah. Well, if you can control a language, you can control a direction, the politics. Like, I'll give you an example. Now, the left love to use the word democracy. Now, I'm not a Democrat. I believe in a constitutional republic. But most Americans, when they think of democracy, they think of, rule of law, elections, free. They have quite a positive view of the word democracy, But the communists will talk about, we believe in democracy. And people say, oh, that's good, Well, democracy means the rule of the people. Who are the representatives of the people? The communists are the representatives of the people. So democracy is ruled by the Communist Party. That's why you have North Korea as the People's Democratic Republic of Korea. That's why East Germany was a German Democratic Republic.
Right.
Will Rogers used to say, any country with democratic in its name isn't.
So true, but they're completely cunning in it. And for heaven's sake, Howard, the American people, because of the perniciousness of communism in our schools, are completely unaware. This should be a red flag to everybody. I just saw this morning, though, by the way, speaking of truth and its irrelevance, Karine Jean-Pierre, the Biden spokeswoman, just left the Democrat Party because she said that it's all they're lying to you. Like, no,
So
not they. Me, we. She was the ultimate.
She was the ultimate shill. She must have said 100 things a day she didn't believe.
But I remember watching her, the very small amounts that I did, and saying, how can you have those words come out of your mouth, knowing that they're patently not true? Anyone who said Biden is fully compos mentis, I mean, it's just simply not possible to say that and believe it.
Well, to keep doing that, you must believe you are serving a higher cause.
That's right.
You are lying for the revolution. You're lying to keep the Democrats in power because those horrible Republicans are evil fascists. It's like, I always refer to the Hogan's Heroes syndrome, like you remember the old program back in the 60s, Hogan's Heroes. So all these Allied prisoners of war in a Nazi prison camp, and they lied to the Nazis, they stole from the Nazis, they murdered the Nazis, they deceived the Nazis, and we cheered them on because they were Nazis, and it was right to do those kind of things to Nazis. Well, if you're Karine Jean-Pierre, it is your moral duty to lie to make sure those damn fascists don't take over. Those Republicans, those MAGA people, those Trump people. It is your moral duty to lie and steal and deceive Republicans because they think we are Nazis.
And this is the danger to me. This is the narrative that Trump is Hitler, that we are all Nazis, and that, by the way, the Jews are genocidal and the poor Gazans are nothing but victims of oppression. So as soon as you do that, you've created that moral imperative, as you say, as our lovely POWs and Hogan's Heroes, you've created the moral imperative to hurt people like you and me and Israel and the Jews, because it's the right thing to do. So once you've done that inversion, right, you've created a highly dangerous. We're not a TV comedy show. This is real.
Look, that young Muslim who killed that beautiful young couple in Washington, D.C., beautiful young couple, just went up and shot them to death. He believes he is doing the right thing. He is not committing evil. He is stopping evil in the world. He did what was right because of the propaganda he'd been pumped into him. And he was a former communist. He would absolutely tell you he did the right thing.
And this is why I've contended since I got started doing this after Benghazi. The media and Democrats, if you can separate them, have blood on their hands in all of these instances. He didn't just come up with a whim one morning. He knew in his soul that this was the right thing to do because he was told it over and over and over. Same with what just happened in Boulder.
Yeah, exactly. It's okay. It's your moral duty to set a flamethrower on septuagenarians and octogenarians walking peacefully through a street, because they are evil, retrograde people who they are basically Nazis. They're evil people, and it's your moral duty to stop evil. So if you have to use a flamethrower, that's what you got to do to set an example for all the others who would commit similar, the other Jews who might do such horrible things as marching peacefully through the street. But this is the danger of the polarization that's been forced on us by the left. The two people that tried to assassinate Trump, they both thought they were doing the right thing. They both thought they were doing a moral thing because of the propaganda that they had been fed. The guy who went into the Family Values Center in Washington, D.C. a few years ago, tried to shoot up a whole people, did it because of Bernie Sanders propaganda. He thought he was doing the right thing. And these people are mentally unbalanced, but the left has created such a toxic environment out there that you're going to get fruitcakes who are going to go over the edge and do this kind of stuff. And a lot of other people are going to vote the wrong way because of it. And a lot of other people are going to do some pretty horrible things short of murder, but this is the left doing this. This is the left has created such division in society that it's going to encourage these lunatics to do horrible stuff.
Even while they're the ones screaming coexist and diversity. Right? All the happy rainbows and all of this and speak your truth. Yeah.
You've got all these diverse lefties who are now supporting a regime that throws homosexuals off roofs and stones, calls for the stoning of female adulterers and things like that. And they don't see any cognitive dissonance in this because it's America's the great Satan, Israel's the little Satan, and okay, we might have to do some rough things, but it's better. It's going to be good in the end. It's a moral. We've got to get our hands dirty to clean things up, and it's our moral duty.
And it's the breaking some eggs for the omelet, right?
Yeah, you do. You can't make an omelet without breaking the eggs. And
how many eggs have been broken, Trevor? How many eggs have been broken?
Yeah,
infinite number.
many more. Yeah, So this is where we're at. That we're the left. If you say there's no communism in America, that's like saying a fish saying there's no water in the sea. We're swimming in it. It's in our kids' education. We just got to recognize it for what it is. It is the systematic destruction of our traditional values and way of life to cause maximum division, maximum hatred, so we can be brought into a revolutionary situation. And that's the transgender movement, the environmental movement, the Women's March on Washington, Black Lives Matter, most of the Democratic Party, most of the college campuses, all the pronoun people. This is all manifestations of the communist movement. And look, when 1 million women marched in Washington for the Women's March with their silly hats on against Trump, I'd say 95% of those women were not communists. But I'll tell you what, 100% of the organizers of that march were communists. Hardcore Communist Party USA, Democratic Socialist America, Liberation Road, they were all communists. But they got 1 million women to march with silly hats on. So that's the power of the communist movement.
We've talked about how the media has been propagating these lies and the church and so on. And you and I were on a webinar with Frank Gaffney, comedian on the present danger China, talking about the influence of China and communists generally on education. And everybody talks about universities and it's trickling into high schools. But you made the point of how it starts much, much younger than that. In our preschools, I found it completely shocking. Tell us in what way China, Marxists, Maoists are infiltrating even at the earliest childhood levels.
Look, there are many examples, but I'll give you one of the most graphic, and that is there's a group in Chicago called the Erikson Foundation. It's named after Erik Erikson, a Marxist psychologist who gave us the term identity crisis. You've all heard of identity crisis. He used to speak at the California Labor School, the Communist Party school in California, and he was thrown out of Berkeley for refusing to sign a loyalty oath back when Berkeley was still sane. But anyway, it's named after him. It's set up by a woman called Barbara Taylor Bowman. Now, Barbara Taylor Bowman comes from a Communist Party family in Chicago. Her daughter is Valerie Jarrett, who was Barack Obama's, minder.
Yes.
And Obama gave Barbara Taylor Bowman an award for the work of the Erikson Foundation back in 2009, which was featured on the front page of the People's World, the Communist Party newspaper. But anyway, so the Erikson Foundation was set up to train early childhood educators, to train the people that train the early childhood educators. This was set up in the early 60s and trained hundreds of people to fan out and train others all around the country in these left-wing education techniques. But in 2017, this group set up a formal partnership with the Chinese Children's Press and Publications Group. This is the official Chinese state body that publishes all of the elementary school and kindergarten materials for Chinese kids. And they have things like poems about Xi Jinping, about poems about Marx. They also publish the publications of the Young Chinese, the Young Communist League of the Chinese Communist Party. It is the main publication source for all the early childhood education materials in China. So this group, which is one of the very most influential in early childhood education in the country, formally partners with the Chinese Communist Party, and they share material, and they have delegations going between countries, learning about how they can learn from each other, how the Chinese can learn from America, and the Americans can learn from the Chinese. So your little granddaughter is probably learning from textbooks, learning from programs devised by the Chinese Communist Party's institution. And that's 3-year-olds we're talking about here, 4-year-olds. So they're getting these racial messages even this early. They're getting these gender affirmation messages. They're getting all this stuff to cause massive cognitive dissonance. They're breaking down these kids' consciousness. It's not that they're teaching them, let's love Mao Zedong.
Yeah.
It's they're teaching them that there's 37 genders. They're teaching them that that the traditional values of their parents are meaningless and null and void. 25% of California high school kids are not quite sure of their gender. That is because of this kind of indoctrination. This is social scientists work on this stuff to indoctrinate our kids, to destroy our kids' conscience. Because you're not going to defend your country or charge the beaches at Normandy if you're not sure what gender you are, or you're looking around for a safe space when the bullets are flying, are you? When you haven't been to Boy Scouts and learned how to set up a campfire and how to be disciplined. This is a conscious program worked out by psychologists, first in the Soviet Union and now in China, to influence and soften the education of our children. And another board member of the Erickson Foundation was, of course, Bernardine Dawn, the famous Weather Underground terrorist, who used to have Obama round to have dinner at her place 5 nights a week for about 6 years. Now, Bernardine Dawn at Northwestern University has set up an institution that has instituted lawsuits all across the nation to weaken school discipline, to make it impossible to expel unruly kids, to discipline children. She has led those. And now American discipline in high schools is virtually non-existent. And so kids can't learn. They don't learn. So that's another bunch of kids who are never going to be rocket scientists, who are never going to be military geniuses, who are going to be dependent on the states and probably develop drug and psychological issues because they were never disciplined at school. So I'm just saying this is very pernicious. Like in New Zealand, I'll give you, there's a Maoist Green Party MP in New Zealand. She was trained in communist China, became a Green Party member of Parliament, and introduced a law to ban smacking in New Zealand. That's as kids smacking their little children. So she banned it. 2007, they banned it. So those kids were 3 years old. Now they're 16, 19 years old. We have got a youth crime epidemic in New Zealand now. Is there a connection? Because it's war on discipline, it's war on personal responsibility, and you'll find everywhere where these laws have been introduced, there'll be a Marxist driving it, just like Sue Bradford back in my home country of New Zealand.
And there's also this child-led education.
Yeah.
For heaven's sake, right? And gentle parenting, which is no parenting at all.
Well, that is, as I said, overturning of the hierarchies.
Exactly.
Pupil, your teacher told you, you get your maths homework in by Tuesday or you will fail. You weren't told, well, you just work at your own pace and you learn what you want to learn. No, there was a very good structure in our schools where you learned very rigorously, like they do in China. The Chinese don't have the same kind of education as we do because they want engineers and they want scientists and they want smart people. They want us to produce a whole bunch of lawyers and a whole bunch of idiots who will be useless for anything. So that's a good example. And Dr. Spock, who was a Marxist, told parents, don't be their parent, don't boss them around, be their friend. Yeah, he's a Marxist. He ruined a whole generation of kids in the 60s who then went to ruin a whole generation of kids in the 90s.
And the thing that I find the most evil of all of this is we can talk about tactics for the communists to infiltrate us and make us weak and malleable and easily overcome and overrun, even if such a thing is required, because we're we're awash in it already. But this last bit that we're talking about, this is through our children's souls. This is, and the rest of it's evil, but this part is so singularly evil that they will, to overcome what we are, they will destroy our children.
Yeah.
And we find ourselves complicit in it. And instead of trying to elevate our children to be the best that they can be, to be, God created them and therefore to honor that, no, they want nothing but to have them awash in their own little mess of a brain. Am I a boy or a girl? All day long. Utter confusion.
Watching TikTok, never going outside,
Yeah,
being
yeah.
told that no matter what they do or how slack they are, they're still going to pass. Just being treated like little self-indulgent, that they're little princes and princesses walking the earth, and their self-esteem is more important than anything else. All of this is a deliberate program to basically cause massive cognitive dissonance in our kids. So we have record rates of youth suicide, drug dependency, aberrant behavior. Should be no surprise. This is deliberate policy.
Any words of positivity before we turn to the next part about books? What can you, is there hope, Trevor?
Yeah, look. America is in a lot better position now than it was a couple of years ago. In the Trump administration, though I do have some difficulties with their foreign policy, is doing a lot of good things domestically, abolishing the Department of Education, closing the borders, all of that kind of thing, and bringing sanity back in that we don't have to worry about, actually calling out this gender identity garbage. There's a lot more to do, but I think that's good. I think that's going to empower parents to get more involved in their kids' education. I see a growth of home churches around the country as the big denominations are betraying their people. The home churches are growing up. There's a new revolution building there. So yeah, I see a lot of optimism. But we can't think just because President Trump's in the White House that everything's going to be fine, because he could be impeached. He could lose the House, get impeached, and it's all over. You get a Democrat in again in 2026, and they legalize all the illegal immigrants here, and they all vote Democrat, and we lose the country. We're still. We can't be complacent, but we should be grateful for what we've achieved or what the movement has achieved.
Fair enough. And I completely agree. Much is being done out of the White House in a lot of these areas. So, but we cannot rest. And it feels like a very tenuous time, but definitely on the right.
It is
track.
a tenuous time, but
yeah.
I believe in miracles, and I believe that miracles happen to courageous people. And I know you have a phrase which I've adopted. We've got to be miracle worthy. We have got to be brave, courageous, and faithful people, and miraculous things will happen in our favor. I think that's the key thing. God never saves cowards or the weak. He supports David versus Goliath. He supports Gideon's army versus the horde. He supported the American revolutionaries against the British. That if we are brave and courageous and faithful, we have every expectation of coming through this.
Thank you for that, Trevor. I couldn't agree more. And thank you I love that you cite that. That's great.
I do. I cite it all the
time. Before we go, I would like you to recommend 1, 2, 3 books that have either had an impact on you or you think we should all read. Entirely up to you. They can be your books, of which you have many. Your choice. What books do you recommend?
Well, I'm going to give 4. The first one is Witness by Whittaker Chambers. That is a beautifully written book by a former communist spy who became a Christian, rediscovered his love for America, his patriotism, and it is the book on understanding communism. It is brilliantly written. Witness by Whittaker Chambers. The other one is Disinformatia by Ian Pachepa. He was the former head of the Romanian KGB who defected to the West and lays out how the communists use false information to deceive us. Gives great examples. Excellent book. The other one is New Lies for Old by Anatoly Golitsyn. He was a Soviet defector right back in the 60s who predicted a fake collapse of communism in the 80s and laid out laid out the whole communist plan going forward from the 60s to today. Well, I think about 180 of his 190 predictions have come true. If you need to understand world politics and how the world is unfolding, New Lies for Old by Anatoly Golitsyn, and another book that was said by the head of the Christian anti-communist crusade, my friend David Noble. He said was the book of the century, and that is my book, Stealth: Kamala Harris's Communist Roots. Now, you may say Kamala's not in power anymore, but this is a book about the Chinese infiltration of the Democratic Party, how they gave us Obama, how they gave us Stacey Abrams and Andrew Gillum and crybaby Cory Booker, how they stole the elections, the vote fraud operations they have, the voter registration things the Chinese have, Black Lives Matter, how the Chinese, since the days of Jesse Jackson in the 1980s, the Rainbow Coalition, which was a Chinese operation, how they have been taking over the Democratic Party, and Hillary and Tim Walz were just the latest creations, but they got a whole bunch more coming. So if you want to understand American politics and read the book of the century, according to David Noble, he does not get paid for saying that, Stealth: Kamala Harris's Communist Roots, which is available on Amazon or through my website, trevorloudon.com. So those are the 4 books I recommend.
Well, thank you for that. For the Kamala book, there's conversation here in California. She may be running for governor.
Yeah, exactly.
Appears to be the front runner, but whichever way, if she decides to or not, I would recommend to any of the, certainly in California, gubernatorial candidates to understand, because even if it's not her, it will be somebody not too dissimilar from her.
Yeah. Look,
So,
she was China's candidate. You know, the Chinese infiltrated Chinatown in San Francisco. They got hold of Sacramento and LA, and that's how they got hold of American politics, through Chinatown. And that's her. And that's how they gave us Black Lives Matter. That's how they gave us the COVID response, all of that. It came through there, and I lay out the whole history going back to the 40s on how this happened. So it's not just about Kamala. She is like a surfer riding a wave. They created the wave, and she rode it. But they've got more people coming up behind her, believe me. They're behind the race politics. They're behind the everything that's going wrong with America. The Chinese have had a major hand in over the last 40 years.
well, Trevor, thank you so much for taking all this time and sharing your expertise. There's so much packed in here that we need to get out to parents, to teachers, to candidates, because this is the water we're swimming in.
Yeah,
and so many are blissfully or unblissfully unaware. So thank you for sharing everything.
Well, you're most welcome, Karen. Thanks for the questions, and I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope some listeners get some benefit from it, and I hope we do this again. So thank you.
Thank you.